Welcome. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that is really important. Are you actually negotiating or haggling? Very often, I find people who think they're negotiating, but in reality, they're haggling. Are you negotiating with your kids, your spouse, your boss, your colleagues, your suppliers, your client, and perhaps believe it's a negotiation? Well, surprise, surprise, in many cases, you're actually haggling. Those of you who've been following me before knows I'm talking about a change of mindset. Negotiation is so much more than just tools in a toolbox and know how to be more clever. Reading a book on how some former expert could be doing their negotiations. It's about changing the understanding of what negotiation might be. So the question I'm asking you today, are you in reality negotiating or just haggling? I recently read a story about a father who proudly explained in his story how he's been teaching his son to negotiate. And the father's account went something like this. He said, "The other day, my son asked me if he could get a few chocolate chips. I said, sure, absolutely you can. You can have 10. Then my son said he asked for 20. I upped my offer to 12. He lowered his request to 18. I made a final offer of 15, which he accepted." The reason I'm mentioning this story is because it explains really well how negotiation often is perceived by many people. In a nutshell, they think negotiation is a process wherein one party wins at the expense of the counterpart. That means one makes progress, but the progress is happening at the expense of the counterpart. But in such a scenario, actually a negotiation, is it a negotiation or is it merely haggling? And haggling, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, in my world, is not a true negotiation. The father's example is what could loosely be called a positional negotiation, if indeed it is a negotiation at all. There was a set number of chips on the table, so the size of the pie was fixed from the beginning, and there was no additional variables in place beyond the number of chips the requesting party would end up with. As we see in many cases like this, both parties begin with a proposal that is favorable only to themselves. So that means they are seeking to maximize their own gain and reduce their pain, with no thought and no interest for the counterpart. I assume obviously that the father in this case thought that 10 chips was few enough to be relatively painless in terms of the factors he had in mind. Perhaps he was thinking about how many chips he would need for a planned batch of cookies and the amount of sugar consumption he thought would be acceptable for his little son. The son's counteroffer with a number more in line with his own desires or craving, obviously, in this case. After making the opening offer, father and son make concession back and forth until they reach an agreement. A compromise, really, which quite often in negotiation is a bad outcome of a negotiation. And it's happened to be right in the middle between their two opening offers. People often find such a compromise to be a good solution in a negotiation. Walking away from this negotiation, actually saying to everybody, it was quite a good negotiation. We reached a compromise. But in most cases, it's actually not a good outcome. Again, back to this father-son scenario, it's an example of the positional negotiation approach, also called a zero-sum situation. It is based on the idea that the pie in place got a fixed size. Most often the pie consists of a sum of money rather than chocolate chips. And once the negotiation concludes, one party has more of the resources than he began with, while the counterparty has less. And in such an interaction, the process of arriving at an outcome often looks like a simple haggle, with each party making concessions without any reasons or explanations. So one side doesn't know the cost, the interest, the purpose, the target, the starting point of the counterpart. You're basically just looking for a very dark cat in a black room. Collaborative negotiation, on the other hand, is quite a different story and style. Here, the two parties would be seeking to expand the kinds and quantities of resources on the table. So rather than looking at just one resource, money for instance, or in this case chocolate chips, you could consider a range of additional factors. They might include timings, duration, warranty, delivery dates, even certainties, and bringing other such factors into the picture is often described as expanding the pie, with additional resources and benefit to be shared by both parties. Collaborative negotiation requires that the parties are changing their mindset about what negotiation is and what it isn't. They need to be willing to exchange information, be more transparent, and learn more about each other's interests. The skill of questioning is actually critical as it's a healthy curiosity, and it is also most important that the negotiators share what they care about, the factors that matters the most to them, both positive and negative. So in a zero-sum negotiation, the parties are more likely to hide such consideration out of fear of that being used against them. So the level of trust presented in a zero-sum negotiation is almost invisible, and it's much, much lower in zero-sum versus collaborative negotiation. So back to my story that I heard. What could the father have taught his son in the chocolate chip scenario? He thought he taught his son to negotiate, but in reality, he didn't. Back to the story, the son could be opening up this negotiation by saying, "Dad, can I have some chocolate chips, please?" The father, instead of just coming up with a proposal, could be saying, "Maybe so. But why do you want chocolate chips?" The son might be answering saying, "Because I'm hungry." Okay, then the dad could say, "But why chocolate chips rather than an apple or a cookie?" Well, the son might be saying, "Because chocolate chips are yummy." And then the father could be responding by saying, "I agree, they are yummy. They taste quite okay, but they aren't very healthy. And I prefer to see you eat something a little more nutritious to help you grow big and strong. And if you are hungry, I wonder if chips will really fill you up enough." The son then might be saying, "Well, you're right about that. They wouldn't fill me up unless I ate a lot of them, but I still want some." And the father might be saying, "So you want to satisfy your hunger and eat something tasty. That makes sense. And I want you to satisfy your hunger too. But wouldn't you rather have something more healthy? How about if you were to eat an apple to fill you up, and then you could have 10 chocolate chips as a treat?" The son is then thinking about it, saying, "I see your point, Dad. Okay, I'll eat the apple, and then I'll have 10 chocolate chips." Now, I have to admit that I probably oversimplified the above example, especially when you consider kids and chocolate chips, and I'm quite sure it wouldn't go down quite that easily with my own sons. But the purpose of the example is to show you how a number of negotiated variables can be expanded and how negotiations focus can be shifted and should be shifted from zero-sum to collaboration. So once again, I repeat my question. Are you actually negotiating or are you haggling?